Thank you so much. Now we'll call on Guadalupe. I have a presentation. Okay. Is here. This one. Okay, so just share this one. No? Thank you.
Hi, thank you very much to Grace for the introduction, to Christina for accepting me in this presentation. I've been learning a lot of all of you. And my subject is a little weird because it's about space, the story of a space through the 18th century from the perspective of the ocean. And I'm sorry because my English is a little poor, so I'm going to read my presentation. The English invasion of Manila revealed the maritime vulnerability of the archipelago and even of the Spanish settlements along the Pacific. It was especially a waken-up call for the Philippines because, unlike the capture of Havana, surrounded by enemy positions like Jamaica, in the Asiatic Pacific, there were no English settlements nearby. So the invasion of Manila was even more surprising. Therefore, after the peace of 1763, it became necessary to restructure the economic and defensive situation of the archipelago. And even when the Spanish authorities paid more attention to the south because it was a gateway from the Indian Ocean and an area of conflict with the sultanates of the region, like Ebu has to say. The north also had to become considered because there was a transit space between the coast of America and China. The objective of this presentation is to review some measures taken by the Spanish government to protect the northern part of the Philippines after the English occupation. The idea is to reconsider how the capture of Manila, supposedly the best defensive Spanish position, show how the rest of the archipelago was easy prey for enemies. And that was problematic because the English advances in the Pacific principally paid attention to the insular areas, including the small archipelagos in the north of Luzon. This situation led to the Spanish authorities to review what the English knew about the Philippines and which enemy projects considered the north part of the archipelago. Also, the Spanish authorities planned ways to extend their presence in those islands of the north and include them in the Trans-Pacific connections. This process can be seen through the maps, logbooks, and maritime projects. This is relevant because, as Antonio Sanchez Martinez has explained, political geographical disputes must also be seen from the history and influence of maps because their power and relevance were not based on their scientific accuracy, but on their ability to generate, develop, and solve problematic, political, and even economic issues. The subject is not new in historiography, and there is research about the project to occupy the islands of the north of the Philippines or about new possible trans-Pacific routes. So the novel of this presentation is to cross-reference information and connect it directly with the English occupation. This perspective will help to appreciate the reconsideration of the maritime spaces around the Pacific, including the connections with New Spain, through cartography sources, geographical descriptions, and logbooks. It must also be said that New Spain was going through a similar situation to the Philippines, in which the borders were also extended to the north to avoid both English and Russian occupation. This revision let us see that the English invasion of Manila also made possible to rethink the enemy situation in the Pacific in general and about its connection with the coast of North America. The enemy advances. When the English left Manila in 1763, it was necessary to know about their advances in the Pacific. Because of that, the Spanish authorities ordered the revision of the foreign maps and logbooks that describe that ocean, and especially the trans-Pacific routes. It should be remembered that the Dominicans tried to extend its missionary system to the Babuyanes in 1686, but the difficulty of connecting with these islands led to the abandonment of that project in 1725. The area then continued to have local maritime connections. During the War of Succession, the situation changed. The license given to the French navigation to cross Tierra de Fuego and trade with Peru and Chile gradually encouraged them to continue their travels to China, which they did through the north of the Philippines. This can be seen with the voyage of Captain Nicolas Frondan of 1788, who after passing through the Babuyanes arrived in Canton. You can see this map, and the closer vision is this one, the navigation pass from the north of the islands. Another example was the voyage of Captain Jean de Boislaré, who in 1713 stopped in Ilocos, where his vessel was captured and sent to Manila. During his detention, Boislaré gave an account of several French sailors who, after making a stopover in Guam, headed for Canton, passing through the north of Luzon. This was reported by the pilot from Manila, Enrique Herman. So, if we look of the north of the Philippines from the Hispanic perspective, it could be considered a peripheral area, but from the French perspective, it was a strategic zone in the connections between America and China. And this perspective was soon considered by the English as well. For example, William Dampier had pointed out the 5 islands in the north of the Babuyanes, the Batanes, which had been named as, by the Dutch as Bashi. Dampier also mentioned some fruits and animals that could be obtained in the area, and that made the islands a possible stopover to be used in the navigations to China. During the War of Succession, the English launched new expeditions to attack Hispanic settlements in the Pacific. For example, in 1709, Woodes Rogers captured the galleon Nuestra Señora de la Encarnación, and later his expedition stopped in the Marianas before heading from the Indian Ocean. In other words, since the beginning of the 18th century, the interest of the English in the Pacific was evident. Also, some islands were used as stopovers, but few measures were taken by the Spanish to prevent these advances. In the first part of the 18th century, the new Bourbon authorities paid more attention to smuggling and launched some regulations to reduce it. An example of this is the proposal of Enrique Herman, who suggested that the Manila galleons travel through the north of Luzon instead of the Strait of San Bernardino. Where there usually were smuggling activities. Herman pointed out that the north of Luzon was an area well known to French sailors, which he knew from the testimonies of Boislaré, and proof of that can be seen in the foreign maps, such as those of John Blas, Nicolas Vischer, or Nicolas Sanson. After Herman's proposal, an expedition was organized in 1741. After sailing around the Babuyanes, the ship returned to Manila through the Strait of San Bernardino. Bueno, this is the anterior, sorry. The pilots recommended that the route not be changed because the north of Luzon was beaten by strong winds and did not have population that could help the Manila galleons in case of need. So there were few changes in the use of the area, as can be seen in the map of Murillo Velarde, where the Babuyanes are barely noticed. You can see the name very far from the map. After the English attacked, the news about the capture of Manila reached Coruña on May 1763, before it reached Spain in January 1765. Those news reached Coruña through an English ship which sailed the route of Good Hope. Some details of the attack were also obtained from the print new published in London, where it was reported that the attack was organized in Madras. So the English invasion highlighted the poor defensive of the archipelago and the deficient Spanish communication along the Pacific. Therefore, one of the first measures taken was the establishment of a direct connection between Spain and the Philippines through the Cape of Good Hope. Despite the Dutch opposition, the objective succeeded in 1765 when Spanish Navy ships arrived in Manila from Cadiz. And in the case of their connections with the American coast, beyond the issue of smuggling, the frontier and maritime space now were considered, since it was necessary to extend the Hispanic presence both at sea and land there. And the islands of north of Luzon were once again considered. There were also other factors that led the Spanish authorities to reconsider the north of the Philippines. In addition to the French and English navigation mentioned before, also it must be considered the Russian presence that had spread from Kamchatka to America. to American coast in search of other skins that they sold in China, a trade in which the English also soon found themselves involved. And that map was copied in New Spain. This problem led to the creation of the Maritime Department of San Blas in 1786 in the coast of New Spain. In the new settlement were organized expeditions of reconnaissance and occupation of High California, and the communications with the Philippines were also considered planned from there. And there are maps made in San Blas who describe this, the Philippine area. In the case of the Philippines, the new English exploration in the area led to the Spanish authorities to more thoroughly consider and protect the archipelago's border. In 1767, the expedition of John Byron and Samuel Wallis passed through the Bashi without stopping. But the height of the islands was described as a marker on the sea route. In addition, the records of the area were increasingly reflected in European cartography. Some of the maps were based on the Spanish maps, but with Dutch or English descriptions. This can be seen in the maps of Maurice Lowitz, whose label indicates that the map is based on that of Murillo Velarde, although the toponymy of the Batanes refers to the description of Dampier. We can see this map is based on the Murillo Velarde. The names are from the Dutch, and the label named the origin of the map. The English presence made it necessary to reconsider the proposal of the pilot Enrique Herman, which, according to Francisco Leandro de Viana, was a safe option for trans-Pacific navigations and would also reduce smuggling activities. The merchants of Manila criticized the new route because, they say, this navigation would alter established traffic and would not adapt to the monsoons. Despite the opposition, in 1771, the authorities ordered a new recognition of the north of Luzon. Thus, in July 1772, the ship Nuestra Señora del Rosario explored the area, and because some difficulties, it stopped in Cagayan for repairs. Then the ships continued to Marianas and returned through the Strait of San Bernardino, as the previous expedition had done. In addition, in 1775, the Order of Santo Domingo was asked for news of its previous experiences in the Babuyanes. Also, some testimonies were taken from local merchants, such as Matias Suarez, who, because of the winds, had to stop in those islands in 1769. Soon, the exploration plans also included the Batanes. In 1777, the minister José de Galvez ordered to the governor José Vasco y Vargas to conquer those islands spiritually and militarily. In addition, an attempt was made to insert those archipelagos into the trans-Pacific routes. So the Manila galleons were ordered to travel to New Spain by the north of Luzon. Also, those ships would make a stopover in the new settlement of Monterrey in the High California. This objective, however, only succeeded 5 years later. But the advances of the Batanes stopped when in 1779, news arrived about the new conflict between Spain and England, and it was preferred to concentrate the defensive forces in Manila. The news came both from Pondicherry and from San Blas. In addition, the exploration of new trans-Pacific routes was soon proposed, which shows the interest in improving and diversify the trans-Pacific connections. Despite the war, the plans of the exploration and occupation of the Batanes continue. This could be seen when in February of 1781, the governor of the Philippines, Vasco y Vargas, sent to the alcalde mayor of Cagayan, José de Huelva y Melgarejo, the order to report on the possibility of sending people and supplies to the islands annually. In addition, in a new report regarding the islands, their precise location was reported. This corrected the data contained in Murillo Velarde's map. The pilot, Manuel Lamas Herrera, also reviewed the area in 1772 and described the Batanes. We can see, the local population was included in the map, referred to as Batan and Batana, and the names of the islands were different from the foreign ones. This action showed the Spanish appropriation of the archipelago. In 1783, the occupation of the Batanes was planned with the presence of a governor, a lieutenant, missionary fathers, troops, and diverse supplies that should be sent regularly. These actions would reinforce the maritime space through which the Manila galleons would continue to transit, a necessity situation since other maritime powers continue to increase their presence in the area. That presence could be sent through the foreign news, logbooks, and maps. For example, John Mears in 1786 pointed out some characteristics of the Batanes and its conditions as stopover zone in a transit to China, as you can see in this quote. Another, and you can see also in this map, and he pointed out the islands. Another example can be seen when John Menzies included the Batanes Islands in his recognition of the southern part of Formosa. Menzies mentioned that those islands were under the yoke of Spain, which perhaps referred to the possibility of changing their alliances. Also, news arrived from Formosa. According to the Intergovernor Pedro Sarro, that island was suffering a rebellion that Chinese authorities had not been able to stop. It was suspected that this revolt had either been initiated by the English or French, or at least they were secretly supporting the rebels. This situation was of a great danger to Spain's interests, since if the revolt spread to the Philippines, there were neither naval or land forces to stop it. The projection of the English in the area can be seen through the new maps that copied the Spanish ones, as can be seen with the map of China of 1794, which was based on that of Murillo Velarde, but with some addition based on the new recognition of the English. We can see this map, the information, the Bashi in the high, the Batans over there, the Babuyans there, with the names of Spanish authorities. Yeah, in the coast of China was more or less the same thing. And you can see also the routes. The routes are mentioned in those areas. The effort to occupy Batanes changed when in 1788, the new governor of the Philippines, Felix Berenguer de Marquina, arrived. He considered defending the south of the Philippines to be more important. And in 1791, he ordered the galleon to return to their traditional route. In 1797, the conquest of Batanes was ordered to be stopped. The Spain presence continued, however, but was reduced to the presence of a lieutenant, missionaries, and soldiers to protect them as a presidio. This action possibly prevent the Spanish enemies from occupying those islands, although they continue to point them out in the records. Finally, from this review, we can see how the North of Pacific changed. In the beginning of the 18th century, from the perspective of Spain, it could be seen as a peripheral area. At the end of the century, however, it became a central communication zone between continents. Also, the north of the Philippines especially became a geostrategic space included in different maps, logbooks, and descriptions that show its relevance and transition process in the politicization that occurred in the Pacific in that century. And that's all. Thank you.